The crack of the Mosin Nagant echoed through the skeletal remains of what used to be apartment block 47. German Lieutenant Weiner pressed his face against frozen concrete, feeling the sting of brick dust in his eyes. Through the twisted metal of what used to be a tram line, Soviet positions sat maybe 50 meters away, close enough to see the mud on their uniforms, close enough to hear them talking. Then the crack came again from a different direction. Vasily Zaitsev watched through his scope as another German officer crumpled behind the rubble. 300 meters, clean shot through the temple. The man had been gesturing to his squad, pointing toward Soviet positions like he owned the place, acting high and mighty. He had no idea he only had seconds to live. That night, Zaitsev scrawled in his diary, "The street is no longer measured by meters, but by corpses." The ink froze before he finished the sentence. Stalingrad had become something beyond warfare. The Sixth Army had rolled into the city expecting another victory. Clean lines, artillery barrages, panzer thrusts, the textbook Wehrmacht advance that had crushed Poland, France, and half of Russia. Instead, they found hell with a postal code. The Soviet ghost shooters materialized from nowhere. They were not there, then they were. A muzzle flash from a factory window. A body drops. By the time German heads turn, the window is empty. The shooter has vanished into the urban labyrinth. German machine gunners swept suspected sniper positions with MG 42 fire, the gun chattering at 1,200 rounds per minute. Brick exploded. Mortar crumbled. But the ghost shooters simply moved to another shadow, another perfect killing position. Lieutenant Hans Weiner of the 24th Panzer Division scribbled in his diary with hands that would not stop shaking. The street is no longer measured by meters, but by corpses. The words looked alien on the page. Nothing in his officer training had prepared him for a streets where buildings simply ended, sheared off like broken teeth, where the constant crack of sniper rifles meant death could come from any window, any pile of rubble, any shadow. The German war machine had one sacred doctrine: overwhelming firepower. Pound the enemy positions with artillery until nothing moved, then send in the panzers, then mop up with infantry. Simple, proven, unstoppable. It had worked in Poland. It had worked in France. It had worked everywhere the Wehrmacht had set foot, until Stalingrad. General Friedrich Paulus spread tactical maps across his headquarters table. Red marks indicated Soviet positions. They were everywhere, not in neat defensive lines where his gunners could bracket them, not in organized formations his artillery officers had trained to destroy. They were mixed in with German positions like some kind of tactical cancer. The math did not work. The doctrine did not work. The entire German way of war suddenly meant nothing. General Chuikov called it hugging. Keep your positions within 30 to 50 meters of German lines, so close that German artillery cannot fire without killing their own men, so close that the massive firepower advantage becomes meaningless. Major Kellner stared at his maps in disbelief. Red arrows marking Soviet positions clustered against blue arrows marking German positions. The lines blurred together like blood and ink in rain. His radio operator reported the 305th Regiment requesting artillery support. Kellner shook his head. Tell them artillery is unavailable. The Soviets are too close, 30 meters. The minimum safe distance for German artillery was 100 meters. The Soviets had simply decided to get close. Soviet submachine gunners crawled through sewers and basements, emerging behind German positions like devils from hell. The PPSH-41 burp gun chattered in tight spaces where artillery shells could never reach. German officers radioed desperate requests for close air support, only to have Stukas accidentally strafe their own positions. The Soviets had collapsed the distance so completely that friend and enemy became indistinguishable from altitude. Soviet engineers wired entire building blocks with explosives, waiting for German infantry to occupy defensive positions before detonating. Whole city blocks disappeared in seconds, taking attackers and defenders alike. It was warfare by mutual annihilation. The German superiority in heavy weapons meant nothing when the battlefield measured 2 meters instead of 2 kilometers. In the rubble maze of Stalingrad, a teenager with a submachine gun could kill a panzer crew that had survived North Africa. The most powerful artillery force in the world sat neutered by an enemy that simply refused to fight at a civilized distance. The 16th Panzer Division rolled into the factory district with confidence. 42 tanks, veteran crews. They had crushed Soviet armor before. Panzer Commander Hauptmann Weber watched his lead tank explode. The turret spun through the air like a child's toy. The next tank took a direct hit to the engine compartment. Black smoke billowed across the advance. "Where are they shooting from?" Weber screamed into his radio. The answer came back cold. Anti-aircraft positions. Grid reference 245733. Weber raised his binoculars. Through the smoke and dust, he saw them. Young women in Soviet uniforms, loading shells, traversing guns, firing with mechanical precision. The 1077th Anti-Aircraft Regiment was not supposed to fight tanks. They were supposed to shoot down Stukas. Instead, they had turned their 85mm guns horizontal. Direct fire against German armor. The engagement lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 28 German panzers lay scattered across the industrial district like broken toys. The 1077th had engaged the 16th Panzer Division shot for shot and won at the factory. Young Soviet women, barely old, enough to vote, had outfought veteran tank crews in direct combat. In his after-action report, Weber wrote carefully. He did not mention the laughter he heard over the radio. He did not mention the precise, professional way the women destroyed his unit. He did not mention that they fought better than most German tank crews. That night, Weber drank schnapps until his hands stopped shaking. The Reich had told him Slavic women were racially inferior, that women could not fight. The burning tanks outside his bunker told a different story. The German concept of warfare required enemies who fit recognizable categories: professional soldiers, desperate civilians, criminal partisans. Soviet female snipers did not fit any category that German military doctrine could process. Hauptmann Werner Schneider commanded a company of the 71st Infantry Division. His men were veterans of the French campaign, experienced soldiers who had seen combat across Europe. They were not supposed to be afraid of anything, but something was breaking their morale in the ruins of Stalingrad. Feldwebel Klaus Richter delivered the problem directly. "Sir, the men are talking about the Soviet snipers. The female snipers. They think the women cannot be normal, that they can see in the dark, that they do not miss, ever." The stories were spreading through German units like a plague. Soviet female snipers who appeared and disappeared like ghosts, who could shoot accurately in conditions where German marksmen could not even acquire targets, who seemed to anticipate German movements before the Germans made them. One soldier in Schneider's company, Gefreiter Franz Müller, had watched a Soviet sniper team through his binoculars for 30 seconds before understanding what he was seeing. 2 women in white camouflage suits moving through the rubble with the fluid patience of hunting cats. One of them raised her rifle. The scope glinted in winter sunlight. Muller dropped below his cover. Mosin cracked. Concrete chips showered down on his helmet. When he peered out again, the women had vanished. That night, Miller wrote in his diary, "The enemy sniper is a girl. She moves like she owns this place, like she knows exactly where we are and where we are going to be. I do not understand how she can shoot so accurately. I do not understand how she always knows where to find us. Lyudmila Pavlichenko had already killed 187 Germans by the time the stories about her reached 6th Army headquarters. The German intelligence reports described her in terms usually reserved for natural disasters. Nina Lobkovskaya, Rosa Shanina, Alia Moldagulova, names that German soldiers whispered in bunkers like curses. The 3rd Guards Army had trained dozens of female snipers, and German soldiers were learning to fear them all. The German Army Medical Corps began documenting cases of what they called sniper neurosis among frontline infantry. Soldiers who developed paralyzing fear of moving in daylight. Veterans who broke down at the sound of distant rifle fire. The psychological warfare was perfect. German soldiers knew that somewhere in the rubble, women who looked like their sisters were hunting them with professional expertise. The knowledge poisoned every quiet moment, every apparently safe position, every assumption about how warfare was supposed to work. SS Oberfuhrer Hans Kemper read the field reports with growing unease. German panzers, the finest fighting machines in the world, crewed by racially superior Aryan men, had been outfought by Slavic women the party had declared barely human. He buried the reports in a classified file and ordered no copies be made. Some facts were too dangerous for the Reich to acknowledge. In the margins of one medical report, he wrote, "These accounts will not be discussed outside this office. The enemy uses psychological warfare tactics that exploit soldier superstition." But the soldiers in Stalingrad knew what they were facing. Lady Death walked among them, wearing a Soviet uniform and carrying a Motin Nagant rifle. And she never missed. Conventional sniper doctrine said you work in pairs. One sniper, one spotter. Find a good hide, engage targets of opportunity, relocate before the enemy can triangulate your position. Simple, effective, predictable. Major Dmitry Petrov looked at the map of central Stalingrad spread across his table. His sniper school had trained him in conventional tactics. What he faced now required something entirely different. Senior Lieutenant Anatoly Chekhov reported that the Germans had deployed counter-sniper teams using the standard triangulation method. 2 observation posts, 1 shooter. When Soviet pairs engaged, they got bracketed within minutes. Petrov studied the urban maze before him. Buildings reduced to skeletal frames. Rubble piles that shifted the geography daily. Basements and sewers and ruins that created a 3-dimensional battlefield. No military academy had ever mapped. He announced they would abandon pair tactics. New formation, 6s. 3 two-man teams operating in coordinated zones across large urban areas. Team 1 engages. Teams 2 and 3 provide overwatch and alternate firing positions. When the Germans try to triangulate Team 1, they walk into the crossfire from Teams 2 and 3. It violated every principle of sniper warfare. Too many moving parts. Too complicated to coordinate. Too many opportunities for friendly fire incidents. It was also brilliant. Vasily Zaitsev was assigned to the first experimental 6. His zone covered 12 city blocks of ruins, from the Mamayev, Kurgan to the central landing stage. 2 other sniper pairs took positions at the triangle points. The system worked like this. Zaitsev would take a shot from position Alpha. German observers would attempt to triangulate his location. While they focused on Alpha, Kulikov's team would engage from position Beta, 600 meters, away. When the Germans shifted to bracket Beta, Danilov's team would open up from position Gamma. To the Germans, it looked like Zaitsev was fighting by himself, from 3 different positions simultaneously. Impossible unless the Soviet sniper could teleport. German counter-sniper teams arrived at compromised hides to find nothing but empty shells and scattered brick dust. The psychological effect was devastating. German soldiers never knew if they were facing 1 sniper or 6. Every movement drew potential fire from multiple directions. Every decision to cross open ground became a calculation of death. Zaitsev understood the power of the unknown. Killing a German does not take long, but outwitting him, that is not so easy. The real weapon was not the Mosin Nagant rifle. It was the constant uncertainty that ate at German minds like acid. German counter-snipers kept looking for individual shooters when they should have been hunting coordinated teams. By the time they adapted their tactics, the Battle of Stalingrad was over. The forbidden formation had created legends where there should have been only soldiers. Major Erwin König arrived in Stalingrad with a reputation. Berlin's finest marksman. Over 400 confirmed kills on the Eastern Front. His mission was simple: eliminate Vasily Zaitsev. Zaitsev had killed over 200 German soldiers, and Moscow was using his success to boost morale across the front. The Reich needed him dead. Berlin sent their best. The duel began on a Tuesday morning in November. König took position in a factory complex overlooking Soviet lines. His scope swept the rubble methodically. Professional technique. He was hunting the most dangerous game. Zaitsev knew König was coming. Soviet intelligence had identified the German sniper immediately. Day 1, König fired 7 shots, no other sniper. Day 2, König relocated 3 times. Zaitsev shadowed him, no shots fired by either sniper. Day 3, the helmet trick. Zaitsev positioned a Soviet helmet on a stick behind a concrete barrier. He waited in a different location, scope trained on the barrier, patient as a spider. König saw movement. The helmet appeared briefly, then disappeared. Classic sniper behavior. The target was checking for threats. König adjusted his position for a better angle. He wanted the killing shot when the helmet appeared again. The helmet rose slowly above the barrier. König centered his crosshairs, held his breath, squeezed the trigger. The 7.9 2mm bullet punched through the helmet. A perfect shot. The helmet spun away. König allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another confirmed kill. Another dead Ivan. That is when Zaitsev shot him. The Soviet marksman had been watching König's position through his scope. The German sniper exposed himself for the killing shot. Fatal mistake. Zaitsev's 7.62mm bullet took König between the eyes. German forces found the body 2 days later. Berlin's finest marksman killed by a helmet on a stick. The Zeiss scope was shattered. Blood had frozen in patterns that looked almost artistic against the concrete. Soviet snipers had left the body undisturbed. A message to other German marksmen about the futility of conventional tactics. The helmet trick spread through Soviet sniper units like wildfire, simple, effective, psychologically devastating. German counter-snipers learned to fear decoys more than direct confrontation. The Soviets had weaponized German professional competence against itself. German officers tried to classify the helmet trick as unfair combat, against the laws of war. But laws meant nothing in Stalingrad. Only results mattered. The temperature dropped to -40°C. German tanks stopped working, not from Soviet anti-tank guns, not from artillery, from rats and mice. Obergefreiter Heinz Dietrich crawled underneath his Panzer III in the pre-dawn darkness, flashlight clutched between his teeth. The tank had been running fine yesterday. Today it would not start. The electrical system was completely dead. He followed the main power cable from the battery compartment toward the engine. The rubber insulation was gone, chewed away. In its place, a nest of frozen mice, their tiny bodies scattered among the exposed copper wiring. Hauptmann Weber received the damage reports from his tank company with growing disbelief. 12 tanks, inoperative due to rodent damage. Rats and mice were chewing through the electrical wiring. The cold drove them inside the engine compartments and crew spaces. They were looking for insulation from the weather. Weber stared at the tactical map. His company was supposed to spearhead the assault on the Red October factory. Instead, half his tanks were disabled by vermin, the most sophisticated fighting machines in the German arsenal, defeated by mice. Feldwebel Klaus Richter documented the problem in his daily maintenance log. Tank 347, electrical failure due to rodent damage to primary wiring harness. Tank 351, starter motor disabled, mouse nest in housing. Tank 355, radio inoperative, rats have consumed insulation from antenna cables. The German army had prepared for many contingencies in Russia: fuel shortages, ammunition resupply problems, mechanical breakdowns from extreme cold. They had not prepared for ecological warfare waged by desperate wildlife seeking shelter from the Russian winter. Soviet tank crews faced the same temperatures, but adapted differently. Their T-34s were manufactured without many of the electrical systems that made German tanks vulnerable. No powered turret traverse, minimal radio equipment, simple, robust designs that could not be sabotaged by hungry rodents. More importantly, Soviet tanks were driven straight from factory floors without the protective coatings and refined systems that attracted vermin. Crews aimed their main guns by looking through the bore, dispensing with electrical gun sights that mice could disable. Lieutenant Colonel von Lenski read the maintenance reports from the 14th Panzer Corps with growing frustration. Environmental factors have degraded combat effectiveness by 40%. Rodent damage to electrical systems requires comprehensive redesign of tank ventilation and wiring protection. The report was filed and forgotten. The German army was too committed to existing designs to implement major changes in the middle of a campaign. Nothing worked. The mice kept coming, driven by cold that would kill them within minutes outside the relative warmth of a German tank engine. Meanwhile, Soviet T-34s rolled through the same temperatures without electrical systems complex enough to interest hungry rodents. In the end, German tactical superiority was undermined by creatures too small to see through a rifle scope. Panzer divisions found themselves fighting an enemy they could not shoot, could not outmaneuver, and could not negotiate with. Environmental warfare had claimed more German armor than Soviet anti-tank guns. The Russian winter fought on the side of whoever was prepared to embrace its brutality rather than trying to engineer their way around it. The building should not have mattered. 4 stories of residential apartments on Penzenskaya Street. Nothing special about its construction or location. Just another Soviet housing block in a city full of them. Except Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and his platoon decided it was worth dying for. The siege lasted 58 days. General Chuikov would later write that Pavlov's small group of men killed more enemy soldiers than the Germans lost, taking Paris. The comparison was not hyperbole. It was a mathematical assessment of German casualty reports versus the strategic value of a single apartment building. Pavlov's house became a fortress because someone understood that in urban warfare, geography is not about territory. It is about fields of fire. The building overlooked the central landing stage where Soviet supplies crossed the Volga. Control the building, control the river crossing. Simple, tactical mathematics. The Germans understood the mathematics too. That is why they kept attacking. Obergefreiter Ernst Weber led the first assault on September 27th. His company approached the building expecting routine urban fighting. The first floor was empty. Weber's men advanced cautiously. Then they tried to reach the second floor. The stairwell had been turned into a killing funnel. Pavlov's men had torn out the interior walls, creating interlocking fields of fire that covered every approach. Machine gun positions on the second and third floors could engage targets at multiple angles simultaneously. Weber's assault lasted 4 hours and gained exactly one floor. German casualties, 23 killed, 37 wounded. Soviet casualties, none. The second assault came 3 days later with a full company and 30 minutes of artillery preparation. The bombardment reduced the building's exterior to rubble. Hauptmann Klaus Richter's men advanced, expecting to find corpses and debris. Instead, they found Pavlov's platoon firing from prepared positions in the basement and first floor. The artillery had actually improved Soviet defensive positions by creating additional cover and concealment. By October, German intelligence estimated that a single apartment building was tying down an entire battalion. What the Germans did not understand was that Pavlov's house was not just defended by soldiers. Civilians lived in the basement, families who had nowhere else to go, who helped with ammunition resupply, medical care, and intelligence gathering. The building had become a community fortress. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann documented the futility in his diary. We attack the same building every day. We take casualties every day. We never take the building. The enemy appears to have unlimited ammunition and replacement personnel. Our casualty reports show company strength losses for platoon-sized objectives. The Germans brought flamethrowers, demolition charges, and close air support. The assault lasted 6 hours. German forces reached the third floor before being driven back by concentrated defensive fire. The flamethrowers proved ineffective against steel-reinforced positions. German casualties: 67 killed, 93 wounded. Soviet casualties: 7 wounded, 2 killed. After 58 days, the Germans stopped attacking Pavlov's house. Not because they had taken it, but because the tactical cost exceeded any strategic value. A single apartment building had consumed more German resources than entire Soviet towns. In his final report, Major Hoffmann wrote, "The building represents a new form of urban warfare where conventional assault tactics prove inadequate. The enemy has created fortress positions using minimal personnel and resources. Continuation of attacks would require division-level commitment for company-level objectives. Pavlov's house stood until the end of the battle. When Soviet forces launched their counteroffensive in January, Pavlov's platoon emerged from their fortress to join the attack. They had held a single building for almost 2 months against the finest army in the world. The defenders emerged from their fortress like specters, blackened with smoke, exhausted beyond description, victorious. German assault troops, who had spent weeks attacking the position, stared at the building with something approaching reverence. 31 soldiers and the civilians sheltering in their basement had stopped an army. The tactical implications rewrote Soviet urban defense doctrine overnight. Single buildings became fortresses. Small units became killing machines. German numerical superiority became irrelevant when every position required siege-level effort to capture. All for a 4-story apartment building the Germans never managed to capture. The innovation came from desperation. Soviet forces needed a way to neutralize German defensive positions without artillery support. Someone, somewhere in the ruins of Stalingrad, looked at a standard RGD-33 hand grenade and asked a simple question: how do you make sure it does not bounce off target? The answer was fish hooks, dozens of them welded to the grenade casing. Obergefreiter Johann Steiner first encountered the modified grenades during a night patrol near the tractor factory. His squad had established a defensive position using standard German doctrine: sandbagged fighting holes connected by communication trenches, with wire obstacles channeling enemy approaches into predetermined kill zones. The wire obstacles were supposed to protect them. Instead, they became instruments of death. The first grenade landed in the wire 20 meters from Steiner's position. Instead of bouncing back toward the Soviet lines, it caught on the defensive wire like a fish on a hook. The explosion killed 3 Germans and wounded 5 more. Before anyone could react, 6 more modified grenades landed in the wire obstacles around their position. "What kind of diabolic weapon is this?" Steiner wrote in his combat report. The fishhooks had turned German defensive wire into a delivery system for Soviet explosives. Every obstacle his engineers had installed now became an anchor point for enemy grenades. Hauptmann Richter examined one of the captured devices, a standard Soviet hand grenade with approximately 30 fishhooks of various sizes welded to the metal casing. Simple, crude, absolutely effective against German defensive doctrine. "Remove all wire obstacles from company positions," Richter ordered. "Sir, that will leave us completely exposed to infantry assault. We are already exposed. The wire is working for them, not us." German engineers had spent months installing defensive obstacles around Stalingrad. Barbed wire, concertina wire, tripwires, connected to flares and mines. All of it became liability when Soviet forces started using hooked grenades. The modified explosives violated every principle of civilized warfare that German officers had been taught. Grenades that anchored themselves to defensive positions created tactical scenarios no military academy had ever addressed. German forces tried countermeasures, mesh screens to catch grenades before they reached the wire, longer-range defensive positions, alternative obstacle materials that would not snag the hooks. Nothing worked completely. The Soviets adapted faster than German engineers could respond. Shorter hooks for mesh screens, longer throwing ranges for distant obstacles, different hook configurations for whatever new barriers the Germans installed. More importantly, the psychological damage was permanent. German soldiers could no longer trust their defensive positions. Every piece of wire, every prepared position became a potential anchor point for Soviet explosives. By December, German units were reporting higher casualty rates in defensive positions than during offensive operations. The safest place for a German soldier was attacking Soviet positions. The most dangerous place was behind German defensive wire. The innovation cost perhaps a few rubles worth of fishing equipment. The tactical impact was immeasurable. German defensive doctrine had been compromised by hardware store supplies. The loudspeakers started at dawn. Soviet propaganda equipment salvaged from destroyed radio stations, powered by generators hidden in the rubble. The message was simple, broadcast in perfect German across the entire 6th Army perimeter. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies in Russia. Stalingrad is a mass grave. Gefreiter Franz Müller pressed his face deeper into the frozen dirt of his foxhole. The voice was calm, clinical, almost friendly, like a radio announcer delivering weather reports. Except the forecast was death. Every 7 seconds. Müller tried to ignore it, but the mathematics were inescapable. He had been in Stalingrad for 4 months. 4 months times 30 days, times 24 hours, times 60 minutes, 346,000 minutes, divided by 7 seconds. Over 49,000 German soldiers dead. The numbers felt about right. Around him, the remainder of the 297th Infantry Division huddled in positions that barely qualified as foxholes. more like scrapes in the frozen ground, offering protection from the wind but nothing else. The temperature had not risen above -30°C in 2 weeks. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies in Russia. The voice was joined by others. A chorus of Soviet broadcasters reading casualty statistics, weather reports, and excerpts from German letters captured during recent fighting. Personal messages from dead German soldiers to families who would never receive them. Hauptmann Weber tried to maintain unit. Discipline, but his men were breaking down. Not from enemy fire, not from the cold. From the psychological warfare of mathematics, broadcast 24 hours a day. "Sir, can we silence those speakers?" Feldwebel Richter asked. Weber looked at his map. The Soviet positions were scattered throughout the ruins like a disease. Artillery could not reach them. Infantry assaults had failed repeatedly. "No, Feldwebel, we cannot." Soviet intelligence had calculated the average German casualty rate across the entire Eastern Front and expressed it in the most psychologically effective format possible. Every 7 seconds? A timer counting down to death for every German soldier listening. At night, the voices multiplied. Speakers hidden throughout the ruins broadcast names from German casualty lists. Dead soldiers talking to their living comrades, explaining how they died, describing the wounds that killed them. Lieutenant Heinrich Boll documented the psychological impact in his diary. The men cannot sleep. The voices continue throughout the night, reading names of soldiers killed yesterday, last week, last month. Sometimes they read names of men still alive, as if predicting their deaths. The Soviet Psychological Warfare Unit had studied German military culture and identified its primary vulnerability. The German belief in mathematical precision, in numbers and statistics, and calculated outcomes. The loudspeakers turned that precision against them. By December, German soldiers were timing the broadcasts, waiting for the 7-second intervals, unconsciously organizing their thoughts around the rhythm of announced deaths. The human mind seeks patterns even in horror. The Soviets had provided a pattern that made every moment of survival feel temporary. The final phase began at Gumrak Airfield, the last German position still capable of receiving supply flights. Transport aircraft struggled to land on runways cratered by artillery, while thousands of German soldiers crowded around the airstrip like moths drawn to flame. Obergefreiter Hans Dietrich watched men with frost-bitten, blackened fingers digging frantically into the snow, trying to claw their way toward escape planes that could not carry them all. Officers abandoned their units. Sergeants shot soldiers competing for space on aircraft. Military discipline collapsed under the mathematical certainty of death. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies in Russia. The broadcast continued even during the evacuation. Soviet speakers positioned around Gumrak announced the names of German officers attempting to escape while their men died in the snow. Personal details about families, home addresses, and pre-war occupations. Information that could only have come from captured documents and interrogated prisoners. The last transport left Gumrak on January 22nd. Behind it, the remnants of the 6th Army settled into their final positions to await death or capture. The loudspeakers fell silent for the first time in months. The silence was worse than the broadcasts. In the absence of the 7-second countdown, German soldiers were left with their own thoughts, their own calculations of survival probability. Without the external rhythm of announced death, they had to confront the internal mathematics of their situation. No resupply, no reinforcement, no escape. Temperature -40°C. Ammunition for 3 days. Food for less than that. General Paulus surrendered on January 31, 1943. In his final radio message to Hitler, He reported 18,000 wounded without the slightest aid of bandages or medicines. The Sixth Army had been reduced to human debris scattered across the ruins of a city that no longer existed. Vasily Chuikov watched the final German collapse from Soviet positions and offered his assessment of what they had witnessed. No, this is not hell. This is 10 times worse than hell. The Soviet commander understood that Stalingrad had transcended warfare and become something else entirely. A demonstration of what happened when military doctrine met the reality of human desperation. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier had died in Russia. By the end of the battle, the mathematics had consumed an entire army. The silence that followed was the sound of German military doctrine acknowledging its own failure. Some calculations are too accurate to survive. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.